Hey everyone. Today the audio quality might be a little inferior because I'm recording from sort of a different setup. I apologize for that. One of my favorite cards from the tarot deck is that of the Fool. I find it ironic that he's called that, for to me he is actually a source of great wisdom. The Fool, even though he is the zeroth, or the first card, is actually extremely significant in that he is both the beginning and the end of the spiritual path. In the beginning, we are all fools, stumbling about, bumping into things, and having no real idea of what we're supposed to be doing. And in the end, we are once again fools, standing at the edge of the world, about to walk through the precipice into thin air, without a care in the world. This is not just me saying random stuff. In Kabbalah, the Fool is Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet and the first or 11th path in the tree of life. Of this, it is said in the magical philosophy. Finally, the 11th path, signified by the letter Aleph and the ox of air, relates to that which is all-potent and which has no form. The tarot symbol is the Fool, who steps into air because there is no other way for him to tread. The rest is silence. I bring up this symbol because it relates deeply to the central topic of this video, that is, of living and dying, ends and beginnings. I have a recurring experience which happens to me every once in a while, and which I'm sure is somewhat common for most people, in which the mind is suddenly released from projecting its notions onto reality, and just experiences everything that is coming in through the senses directly. Raw input, with no interpretation on top. Usually I will laugh, either out loud or in my mind, at how absurd and nonsensical it is that we construct these solid realities out of these constantly changing and disparate things that come in through our senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, thinking, etc. Sometimes the experience is very deep, and almost all of the projection stops. Then when I come back, I'm shocked at the fact that I am quote-unquote human, that I quote-unquote do things in the world, that I quote-unquote have things such as limbs and clothes and etc. And I notice that all of these things are somehow totally unnecessary to reality, that it could just as well have been any other way, completely topsy-turvy, and I wouldn't even have noticed. This, of course, lasts only for a few moments, and then you notice the thoughts coming back in and the worries about life and about how we will, sort stuff out. And then you're projecting solidity again. And so everything becomes boring and frustrating and you're back on the wheel. How does this process work? How is it that we project solidity onto reality? And how can we slowly come to understand this process and not be slaves to it? Most occult and spiritual teachings often emphasize the fact that our perceptual frameworks limit and condition our experience of reality. Sometimes it is said that we are the co-creators of reality. What do they mean by this? That we somehow have the power to manifest anything we want into reality? Well, maybe, but even then we are still working within the conceptual world. There is a much deeper meaning to us being co-creators of reality. And that meaning lies precisely in understanding how we project reality onto experience. William Blake in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell says, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite, for man has closed himself up, till he sees all things through the narrow chinks of his cavern." The cavern Blake talks about is precisely our supposedly solid perception of how reality is. That is, our map of reality. Now, building maps is not a bad thing. I've talked about this before on the channel. We create maps and models of reality based on our experience. Of course, because we must navigate the world and survive within it. If we were constantly experiencing the full range of sense input at every moment, like you would when you're on psychedelics, for example, or in deep meditation, then survival in nature would be absolutely impossible. You have to be able to tell a friend from a foe in a fraction of a second in order to even have a chance at survival. So because of this, our most primitive maps usually classify the world into two things, friend or enemy, or safe or dangerous, since this is what at the most basic level is needed to survive in nature. So we filter our experience into categories, and this happens long before verbalization or thinking about reality. And there's no problem with this. We need this to survive. However, the issue arises when we confuse the categories, or the maps, with reality itself. I'll illustrate this with an example I saw on Instagram with a very good meme. The image that you are seeing on the screen right now is that of a tree. It is a picture of a tree. I think we can all agree on that. Now, look at this image. It is still an image of a tree, right? A different tree, but a tree. What is happening? Well, what's happening is that what you see in either image is not a tree. You see the idea of a tree. You are observing the world through the lens of the world of ideas, your unconscious psychic map of reality. We do not see things as they actually are, at least not most of the time. The practice of magic is, among other things, a disciplined path, a training, for us to become masters of the psychic field and not its slaves. A master magician is able to reify and nullify concepts at will, which means that he can determine what he will see as reality. I cannot stress how incredibly useful this ability is. At the end of the day, what's the point of all this? Even if you're not interested in magic or occultism and just want a better way to live out your life, then thinking about this and practicing is one of the keys to that. Why? Well, it turns out that the majority of our quote-unquote happiness does not depend solely on physical well-being and feeling good. It's instead based on our quote-unquote having certain things. That is, reifying certain objects or concepts in the psychic field and believing that we possess them. If you've watched this video thus far and are sort of familiar with, general esoteric ideas, you will understand that this is a completely illusory and fruitless task, since, of course, actual experience does not contain objects or things, but it's actually an infinite, never-ending flux of sensory phenomena, which are constantly changing and fluctuating, and not at all solid. It is a bit like a dream, in the sense that when you wake up from a dream, you see that it is totally gone, that there was never any solidity there at all. It was just an experience, a dream, and now it's completely gone away. You couldn't ever have possessed any of the things you had in the dream, even if you wanted to, because they're things in a dream, they're fake. Reality itself is actually just like this as well. But since we project solidity onto it and believe that there are real, actual things out there to be had and possessed, we suffer. We suffer tremendously because of this habit of ours. In actuality, happiness is available to us at any moment, even in the most seemingly dire of situations. All we need to experience this truer version of happiness, which is not dependent upon external conditions, is to loosen our grasp on ideas, that is, our projections, of how reality should be, and to just experience life directly, moment to moment. This is true happiness. In actuality, experiences and patterns, be they pleasant or unpleasant, are there just for that, to be experienced. When we try to run away from an unpleasant experience or emotion, we're actually just creating the conditions for it to happen again in the future. And then we will be even less prepared to deal with it because we have created that much more resistance. This in itself is the cause of all suffering. And because we get trapped in the idea, we project, that certain things should be experienced and that other things should not, we actually become blind to the fact that we are the makers of our own suffering. Every closing up, every act of trying to escape or replace leads to corresponding suffering, because you're actually closing yourself up to God, which is reality. And correspondingly, every loosening up and acceptance of reality leads to happiness, peace, and well-being. It leads to eternal life, but only because one is dying at every moment to be renewed again afterwards. From this, one can see that death is totally relative as well. We arbitrarily separate an object from its surroundings, we give it a name, and remember that this separation does not actually exist in the world out there or in our experience. Since everything is experienced as one thing, there's no separation, ever. But we give that object a name, even though it is constantly changing, and we give it a certain set of characteristics and associations, and that is what we associate with the name. Over time, the object changes and changes even more, and so we must, of course, change our association of the name we had given to it, otherwise the object wouldn't be recognizable anymore. And eventually, after a short or a long time, the object changes so much that it becomes unrecognizable, and then we say that it has quote-unquote died or passed away. Actually, what has happened is that the name we had given has become obsolete. Nothing dies in reality, at least not in the conventional sense. Only concepts are capable of living and dying. Actual reality is in a constant state of flux, always renewing itself at each moment. An eternal making new again, as Hermes says. All the tarot cards have their own special significance, but today is about the Fool. Let us live like fools, walking on seemingly thin air. Maybe we will find that things weren't as solid as they seemed to be before, and that it was actually our views that were obstructing the divine miracle happening right in front of our eyes. God isn't to be found in some ecstatic or prophetic vision, at least not only there. Infinity is constantly manifesting itself here and now. It is only that we close ourselves up to it. So let us loosen up, project less, and receive more. That is the lesson of today's video. May you all be well, and I hope to see you soon once again.